Welcome to Almost Awakened. I'm your host, Bill Reel. We explore human development here, spirituality, psychedelics, sexuality, and more. Our aim? Equipping you with tools for a fulfilling post-religious life. This is Almost Awakened. Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm your host, Bill Reel. Grateful for the chance to be sitting down in front of you and to have this conversation. Today, we're going to talk about trauma. Several things have come up, and I'll just sort of try to wing my way through this. I've got a few slides to show. But I read a book maybe 6 months ago or so titled, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. This is Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. I'll put it up on the screen right now. And I read this book, and it's been deeply meaningful to me. It might even been a little longer than 6 months ago. There's a quote from the book. There's lots of quotes we'll go over today, but there was a quote from the book. If we understand the oak, if we want to understand the oak, it's back to the acorn we must go. And Bruce Perry, Oprah Winfrey, great book. It really talks about essentially, for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part, childhood trauma. And I'm in therapy with a therapist. I'm learning a lot about myself. And the way this conversation, I guess I'll start it off, is a couple of days ago, I'm talking to my wife, and I don't know how it came up. I forget what initiated the conversation, but I wanted to respond to her with what my final wishes were. And I've iterated them, and now I'm reiterating them to my wife. I want her to be crystal clear that this is what I want. And I say, what I want is I want you to cremate me. I don't want a funeral. Have a party at our friend's home. We have a friends who have a really great house for a giant house party. And, they would, at the drop of a hat, they would have no problem agreeing to this, to honor me and my death, have a huge party at their house, invite all of our friends, maybe there's 100 people, whatever it is, and just have like this kick-ass party in my name. And my wife goes, I'm not doing that. I'm having a service for you. And I said, what are you talking about? Like, I want cremated, and I don't want a service. And we sort of had a little bit of conflict. She parted her way, she went out the door and went on with her day. And I'm sitting here reflecting. I'm like, man, why did that stress her out so much? And then it hits me that I'm in this post-Mormon space as a well-known voice who people claim I've had some sort of significant impact on their ability to process learning that the church isn't true, being informed enough to make the decision that the church isn't true, and being able to step back from Mormonism and to move on with their life in some fashion that they are grateful for, that they see their life as being better than it was if they had stayed in Mormonism. And it hits me that if I were to die, again, not if I die if I'm 80 years old, but if I were to die in the next, say, 10 or 15 years, it seems as though the ex-Mo community, and I'm not trying to be arrogant here. I have the opposite view, and you'll hear this as the show goes on. My fear in telling you this story is that in your mind, you're thinking about my arrogance and how much I need to be celebrated. But I actually have the opposite view. But it does strike me that there are people in this community who would go, man, I just wanted to pay last respects to Bill and all of his work and what he's accomplished in, a decade, or at that point, 2 decades or 3 decades. And to say thank you, to pay last respects and say thank you for what you did for my faith journey and me being out of the church. Sorry, I'm going to be a little emotional today. And I know that because I know what story is coming and I know how I'm feeling about all of this. But so as I'm thinking through my conflict with my wife about like, hey, these are my last wishes. And she's like, I'm not doing that. It strikes me like, I get it. Okay. I understand where she's coming from. She would want a space where people who benefited from my work would be able to say thank you once I'm gone. Like, again, lots of people say thank you while I'm living, but people would want to essentially show respect for somebody who's made a difference in their world. And there's this, again, I'm not arrogant about it, but there is a collective group of people who have benefited by my years of putting out content. The other side of it too is my kids see a certain side of their dad. My kids have a dad who was really stern. My four children have had a dad who was really gruff at times, a real verbal disciplinarian, grounding them for things, and they they don't really have the ability. Maybe to some degree today they do, but not exactly. They don't really have the ability to appreciate this other side of me that has spent 10 years trying to shine a light on the church's unhealthiness and to protect the little guy, the folks who are marginalized and deeply vulnerable to trauma and abuse. So I'm thinking about the conflict with my wife, and I realize like, oh, I get why she would want to do that, and I sense like, oh, it's wouldn't be fair to the people who would want to somehow have some sort of way to pay final respects. But I think of like the TV show Succession. If you've seen it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's this really mean, gruff father, but he's a huge success in the business world. He is just a huge success, but he is just downright nasty. He achieves all of his success on the backs of others. He manipulates and bullies everybody around him to make the situation what he needs it to be. And plot, I'm gonna essentially tell you the ending of the TV show. So if you want to mute it for a minute or two, I think you'll still get benefit from this episode. If you want to skip ahead a second or two, in fact, if you'll skip ahead 1 minute, I promise I'll be done by then. But so here it is. In the TV show, the father dies and they have the funeral service, and all these people, all the movers and shakers in the corporate world show up, and the kids are trying to give their sermon talks, their funeral talks, I should say, at the funeral. And the kids are trying to pretend their dad was incredible, but they end up just breaking down and acknowledging that their dad was a piece of shit. And the conclusion is that a man can be both. A man can be a horrible bully of a dad and can be a highly successful businessman. And even in the business world, having accomplished his successes in the business world, which are still admirable. Like that guy accomplished a lot of shit. And he did it as an asshole, bullying people and manipulating people left and right. So as I watched this TV show, I've sat and thought about, again, in my own relation to my own life, that on one hand, my kids would be going to my funeral, my memorial service, because I will be cremated, I believe. When my kids go to my memorial service, it'll be difficult for lots of reasons. Number one, their dad dies and they love their dad. But also they realize that their dad wasn't the best. He was really hard on them, and he didn't make our home a safe space for them to feel safe and to be encouraged to grow and allow space for mistakes, and they would sense sort of by that experience that their dad had also helped a lot of people and been good to a lot of people and had benefited a lot of people. And I think that's such a hard thing to wrap your head around. I've been going to therapy for about 6 months. By the way, and again, I don't know why we feel the need to do this. I sense that the audience listening will want to make assumptions about how good or bad I was as a dad. And I don't have any need to obscure that or to deflect about it or to be dishonest about it. I was not physically abusive with my children, but I was harsh. And anytime I felt a disturbance inside me, and I've said this before in the podcast, anytime I felt a disturbance inside me, my world wasn't the way I wanted it to be, I would lash out at the outside world and mostly my wife and my children and demand that they change whatever about the way the world was so that I could be okay again. And so 6 months ago or so, I started seeing a therapist, and great therapist. And if you're in Southern Utah and you want a great therapist, reach out to me. And as we're having conversations, I'm really sitting with the parts of me that acted unhealthy and why. Why did they act unhealthy? And I know that I felt a lot as a kid. I felt emotions really strongly. I remember going to a funeral for my cousin's step grandpa and bawling my eyes out, and not bawling my eyes out like, "Oh, this is that," like, bawling my eyes out because I could feel how hard this was for the people who cared about this man who had died. I could really sense that. I could really, sit with how much it must hurt certain individuals to have lost this man whose life was now over. Um, I felt a lot as a kid. And I still do. Like I get emotional easy, I get sentimental easy. If I sense someone in the room is hurting, I feel that. And man, this is gonna suck in terms of trying to get all this out to you. But I hope that you get something from this. As I think about trauma, almost all of us have ways in which we show up in the world to protect ourselves from getting hurt anymore. And most of us got hurt when we were little kids in ways that we never should have gotten hurt. The things that happened to us never, never, ever, never should have happened to us. And that's the whole point in the book is, what happened to you? That you didn't deserve what happened to you, and that you came into this world thinking that everything was perfect and innocent, and somewhere, sometimes really early, but somewhere along the way, something big happened where you were like, "Oh, fuck," like, "Oh god, the world isn't perfect. Shit. What the fuck just happened?" Like, you're caught off guard because shit happens. And some of you have been just deeply traumatized, molested, and sexually abused in one form or another. You've been physically abused. You've been bullied in school. Horrible things. And when those horrible things happen, they shape they shape who you are. They impact your ability to show up the way you did before the thing happened. Um, a lifelong set of beliefs and behaviors can emerge when trauma is experienced at a young age. Going back to the idea of me being cremated, don't have a funeral, be as cheap as possible, have a big party. I realized that I don't want to have a memorial service. I don't, because I don't want my kids to come to honor this man who wasn't good enough to them. So I want to avoid that. And also I realize that my wife's right. Like on some level, there needs to be a service where people can pay their last respects. Bruce Perry, again, author of the book What Happened to You, in conjunction with Oprah Winfrey. We elicit from the world what we project into the world, but what you project is based on what happened to you as a child. So the question is, I want to approach it today from what happened to me. My birthday is September 14th, which means, among a lot of things, what it means is that I started school earlier than the rest of you. Whereas you started kindergarten when you were 5 years old, I started kindergarten when I was four. I went into my senior year 16 years old. So I was a 4-year-old going to kindergarten. This is my kindergarten picture. I'll make it a little bigger here. This was Furry Elementary School in Perkins Township in Sandusky, Ohio. Up there, circled in the top right corner, that's little 4-year-old me. Um, I was a good kid, and the world was innocent, and everything was pure. My parents were really good. Could have I could have ended up with much worse as parents. My parents were really good. My mom was a nurse's aide. My dad worked in road construction, asphalt, quarry, road paving. They both worked hard. They both loved me and my brother. My brother's 4 years younger than me. So he was just being born right about this moment in time. He had just been born a few months earlier. So I'm 4 years old in kindergarten. Great kindergarten. Had fun. I can remember the names of these kids. They're, of course, my age now, but I can tell you the names of these kids. And actually, the left-hand column, very far left-hand side with the red bow tie, that was my first girlfriend, uh, my first kiss. I was a kindergartner, and she, towards the end of the school year, informed me that she was going to move. And I asked her if I could kiss her before she moved, and she said yes, and I kissed her. And then she walked over to her right, to the right on the screen, I should say, her left, but to the right of her, three people. So there's that section of three there in the middle. The one on the right, his name's Robert, and she immediately went over to him and gave him a kiss too. So that was my first experience being slighted by a woman, by a female. But such a fun moment in my growing up that I look upon fondly. I don't have first grade, but first grade is where the event happens. In first grade, I have Mrs. Arndt for a teacher. Mrs. Arndt is old. I mean, if I had I remember what she looked like. I've seen the picture of her numerous times. She is old. I mean, pure white hair, got to be at least retirement age. Maybe she's continuing to work past it. This would have been 1982, 1983, somewhere in there. And again, I'm 5 years old in first grade. She's old as hell, and when she was in her heyday, this would have been a whole different world, right? 19 whatever. It would have been 1930s, 40s, whatever it would have been, I don't know. But she was pretty much retiring or close to when I had her in first grade. But she was 65 at least. And again, I wish I could show a picture because I think you'd see it and go, "Yeah, man, that lady's 72 years old." She couldn't handle teaching anymore. She couldn't handle little kids. And in my school, and I assume like most elementary schools, there's a shared bathroom. I keep looking up. It's just easier for me to think through thoughts and remember things. But there's a shared bathroom in between the classrooms. And so every two classrooms would have a bathroom in the middle. I'm in kindergarten, sorry, first grade. I was showing you the kindergarten picture, but I was in first grade. And in first grade, I am using the restroom, and I'm talking to the kid next to me. There's a kid next to me using the restroom. I think there were like two urinals and a toilet in a stall, stall with the toilet. And I'm at one urinal, and there's this kid next to me in another urinal. And I don't remember who it was. I don't remember if they were in my class or if they were in the class that we shared the bathroom. I don't know. And it must have been against the rules to talk in the bathroom because Mrs. Arndt, I'm at the urinal I'm tinkling, I'm going number one. And she comes into the bathroom door like angry, like in a rushed, stern, angry mode. And she comes into the bathroom and she grabs me, takes me out of the bathroom into the classroom, and with my pants down, takes a yardstick and swats my ass in first grade. And I don't remember anything else about that day. I just remember the embarrassment, the shame. And I go home, and I don't remember if I say something to my parents or if my parents can tell that something's off, but eventually I communicate to my mom and dad what happened to me, what she did, and they were irate. I remember them making a phone call to the school. I just talked to my dad this morning, and he remembers that too, that they were irate, that they called the school, they called the school board, they notified them of what happened, and, Mrs. Arndt, the teacher, she denied it. She said, "I didn't do that." And it's 1982, 1983, it's just a different world back then. People didn't follow through. If there was a difference of word and your kid got traumatized, nobody really pushed the issue. Nobody tried to really fight for the kid. That happened all the time. Um, I got a friend who, when we talk, when he says, when you got molested back then, you just got on your bike and rode home. Nobody did anything. And my dad, even, in the messages to him earlier today, he said, "I'm really sorry that happened. We didn't know what to do. It was her word against ours, and we thought we did all we could, and we just had to let it go. We had to move on. We had to live life." But that moment affected me. There were lots of things. Now, again, I didn't know this at the time. I don't even speak about this story, um, other than just recently, sort of wrapping my head around how this story affected me. It plays into my being sort of a justice warrior. It plays into my being an 8 on the Enneagram. I don't think I would have been an 8 if this hadn't have happened. I wouldn't have been a justice warrior and tried to um, force unhealthy systems to their knees and have them apologize for the shit that they do. But something happened to me when I was a kid. Another thing it did is it impacted how I parented. Any moment that felt like shit was getting out of control or felt like shame or embarrassment was just around the corner, I would show up in unhealthy ways. All my life, if there is any risk of shame or embarrassment, I will go to the end of the earth back to try to make that not happen. Um, I also bullied people instead of being bullied, because Mrs. Arndt bullied me in a really traumatic way. And so the rest of my life, I spent like, oh, if there's a risk of the kids at the lunch table making fun of me, I'm just gonna pile on some other kid and make fun of them because I don't want to be the one being made fun of. And it's striking me as I sit down with my therapist and talk through things, it strikes me that what happens to us has so much to do with who we are in the here and now. Um, it's also I put on a ton of weight. I gained a ton of weight. I'll click here the next picture. But you see, I'm just a scrawny little kid. I don't have the first grade picture, but here we skip to third grade, and by this point, I'm one of the heavier kids in my grade. And within another year or two, I'm not like obese, but I'm significantly overweight. Um, Food was a way for me to sort of escape things. And as I sit down with my therapist and we talk, it was like this light bulb moment because I'm telling him, I'm like, man, I just do not want to deal with shame. I do not want to deal with embarrassment. It affected how harsh I was with my kids. It affected, again, weight gain when I was younger. And he's like, well, what was it? What happened to you? And I'd read the book before then. I thought, you're right. Something happened to me. What the hell was it? Because I don't really spend time talking about this story. I know it. Like if I see the first grade picture, I sort of go like, oh yeah, there was that thing. But I don't really think about it as I'm telling traumatic stories from my life. If you're sitting around in a hot tub with a bunch of friends and you're all just shooting the shit, telling about your lives and sharing things that are interesting, funny, entertaining, sad, I never tell the story. Um, but this was significant. And so I tell my therapist, I say, I know what it is. I know what it is. And then I just sat there and bawled my eyes out for 20 minutes. And I said, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was. It was a big deal to a 5-year-old kid who thought the world was perfect and didn't know how to make sense of any of it. That shouldn't have happened to him. And I'm sitting here now, sitting here with you, and I'm thinking about all the shit that happened to you, all the things that happen when you're little, when you're young and you don't know how to make sense of the world. You don't even know what this is. I look at my grandkids, 1-year-olds, 2 1-year-olds, and a 4-year-old, and I look at them and I go, they don't, they're born into this world with a consciousness behind those eyes, and they don't even know what they were born into. They have no clue what kind of meaning to apply to this world. And every day you add a little bit, but it's a little bit, and you don't even have a clue what this world is or what it means. And you just start off thinking like, my mom and dad are great. My aunts and uncles are great. My grandpa and grandma are great. The teachers are great. The neighbors are great. And sooner or later, something happens to wreck that. And you realize that there are really bad things in this world. And there are people who, for some reason, they hurt you and you don't know why. This experience with Mrs. Arndt is nothing. Like I'm fully aware that on a scale of 1 to 10, compared to other traumas, this is a 1 or a 2, like whatever. But I'm very acutely aware of trauma and the trauma that all of you deal with, the things that have happened to you. And I want you to know, like, what happened makes such an impact on who you are, how you protect yourself, where you'll take risk and where you won't, where you'll be vulnerable and where you won't, where you'll attempt to be authentic and where you won't. And I realized that the system we came from was deeply unhealthy too. And I just want you to know that I'm sorry for what happened to you. And my 2 cents are that every one of us deserves a therapist, a good therapist, where we can talk out, dive into, peel back the layers of the things that happened to us. But there are other lessons to learn too, and there are other things that come from trauma. I want to share a few more quotes from the book. Oprah Winfrey says, even if you've accumulated a house full of nice things and the picture of your life fits inside a beautiful frame, if you have experienced trauma but haven't excavated it, the wounded parts of you will affect everything you've managed to build. Even if you've accumulated a house full of nice things and a picture of your life fits inside a beautiful frame, if you have experienced trauma but haven't excavated it, the wounded parts of you will affect everything you've managed to build. So in other words, you got to dive into it. If you want to fix it, if you look in the mirror and you go like, I'm completely happy with who I am and the way I show up in the world and I don't have shit to work on, great. But if that's not the case, you're going to have to dive into it and peel back the layers. Bruce Perry, the other author of the book, says connectedness counters the pool of addictive behaviors. It is the key. My ability to have human connection with the people around me has been crucial to confronting my own bullshit connected to the shit that happened to me. You will need good friends. You will need people close to you that you can talk to and that you can feel human connection with. And to recognize that that human connection is the counterpunch to your unhealthiness, to your addicted behaviors. We need to feel connected. Oprah says the quickest and most consistent way for me to get back to my own rhythm. By the way, when that happened to me in the first grade, my parents just dropped it. They just moved on. They just said, hey, she said it didn't happen. We believe you, but there's nothing we can do. We just have to live with it. And we have to move on. And the moving on and not having any sort of healing from it is as, if not more problematic to how I was able to process that than the trauma itself. The original event that occurred. And hence, I simply want to note to you why LDS Church, it's so important that you handle sex abuse differently than you do. Because you're right. You get to stand back and go, I'm not the abuser. But by you not doing the right thing to create accountability for children, accountability for the things that happen to children by adults who were unhealthy and abused, you are exponentially increasing the trauma inside of them and the inability to process and heal. It's why all of us, when we fuck up, we owe it to the people we hurt to say we're sorry. It's why it's so important to be accountable for the shit we do. It's the only way that people can heal. The quickest and most consistent way for me to get back to my own rhythm is to walk in nature, just focusing on my breath, my steady heartbeat, the stillness of a tree, the intricacy of a leaf can center me in the wholeness of all things. So I'm just reiterating quotes from the book, What Happened to Me. I just want to note Oprah is telling us that there are ways to get grounded, to be present, to sort of not be overwhelmed by all of this work and all of this healing and all of this confronting the shit that both happened to us and that we then created to protect ourselves. As you revisit your past, know that no matter what happened, you simply being here, alive, makes you worthy, and know that there is hope. I think that's a big one. I think so often for those folks who have suffered serious traumas, how they feel about themselves and life in general ends up being often hopeless. And Oprah is simply reiterating that each of us has intrinsic value simply by being here and being alive. The way you treat a child from the time that child is born is what sets them up to either succeed or struggle. Oprah Winfrey. Bruce Perry said most people think about therapy as something that involves going in and undoing what's happened. But whatever your past experiences created in your brain, the associations exist and you can't just delete them. You can't get rid of the past. In other words, you can't undo what happened. It happened. Both the things that happened to you and then how you showed up in your world affecting others. It's happened. There's no going back. Therapy is more about building new associations, making new, healthier default pathways. It's almost as if therapy is taking your 2-lane dirt road and building a 4-lane freeway alongside it. The road stays, but you don't use it much anymore. And I can vouch for that. Therapy has been huge. Having good friends that you can just talk shit out with has been huge. Very often, what happened takes years to reveal itself. I can say truth to that. It takes courage to confront our actions, peel back the layers of trauma in our lives, and expose the raw truth of our past. But this is where the healing begins. Oprah, forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been any different. I just got done interviewing Natasha Helfer, and we talked a lot about various things, but one of the things we did talk about was forgiveness. And she said, like, I don't like forgiveness. I actually kind of hate forgiveness because it feels like you're being told to move on, that the person isn't really wanting to confront what they're doing, and you just have to move on. Just you have to live with it and move on. That's what forgiveness is often meant to be. And I like this definition because it's not that. Forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been any different, but we cannot move forward if we're still holding on to the pain of that past. And that's the last one I've got. I just want to note, again, I know a little bit of disconnection here in this episode, but I hope you hear me. I know that every one of you have had things happen to you, and some of you have had atrocious things happen to you. And it's my hope that you'll get the help you need to work these things out, to talk them out in safe spaces, to be able to process trauma. And I just want you to know I take seriously the pain, the hurt, and the effect that it's had on you, that the traumas that you've incurred. And I want nothing more than all of you to heal, to be happy and healthy, and please avail yourself to any resource or tool that helps you get there. Uh, we'll see you next week, and I hope this episode was helpful. Have a great day.